New Alliance Talk. Redoing Growth, Economic Development in a Resource-Limited World. Please welcome to the stage, Jessica Bennett from Bloomberg.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the Hamburg Sustainability Conference. My name is Jessica Bennett and I lead development of climate transition analytics at Bloomberg. It's my absolute honor to be with you here today. We'll shortly host a panel on economic development in a resource-limited world. But first, I'd like to introduce Stephan Schnabel, the Vice President of the Hamburg Chamber of Commerce and CEO of HELM AG, to share opening remarks.
So our minister is on our way, but therefore, excellencies and dear ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome here to Hamburg to our today's session, Redoing Growth, Economic Development in a Resource-Limited World. And reviewing our discussions and interactions of our last year's Hamburg Sustainability Conference, I'm more than convinced that this place, this room or rooms, and these ambitious people here today are the right platform to discuss and to find solutions for our challenges. Our planet is still sending us signals, and maybe stronger ones than ever before. Record temperatures in Paris, Madrid, London as well, and just now even here in Hamburg, I think are incredible signs. And please, we should not be so quick to think that these have been only the exceptions. And at the same time, our focus is diverted to a number of global topics. As a whole, we make maybe even steps backwards. And it's not only because the US have stepped out of the Paris Convention. Also, many major companies have stopped their sustainability efforts. And the general opinion is, sustainability, yes, but please, let's fix our economies and our companies first. Or in other words, it's profitability contrary to sustainability. And I think we have to admit the sustainable solutions must be affordable. If they are 1 or 2 or even 3 times more expensive, then they will not be realized. This is simply not realistic. But what can we do together as a team to share the risk and the task to make these solutions feasible? If we put all weight on the companies alone, honestly, this won't work. But if we work together as a team, then I see a much better chance because profitability and sustainability can go along with each other. And at the end, we all have only limited resources, the governments, the institutions, and the companies. And this is why this Hamburg Sustainability Conference in 26 is more a true economic conference. Hence, we are focusing in our today's session on the question, for example, can we grow differently? And how can we truly decouple economic growth from resource consumption? What should industrial policies, finance, and regulations play in an accelerating system of change? This session brings together some of the most important voices in that effort, from international trade, from economic governance, from business, and from finance. And therefore, we also very much appreciate that our minister, Carsten Schneider, will join us in a moment. Finally, if today's discussion speaks your interest, I would like also to invite you to join on Wednesday our Future Economy Day, where we'll explore how to transition the green and the digital transformation together and can become a powerful driver of sustainable growth. But now to our business of today. I'm looking forward to our discussion here and now. And it is why I would like to invite our moderator, Jessica Bennett, on the stage. So this is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. I invite you to please have a seat for our panel, and I'd like to invite the rest of our panelists to join us on stage. Thank you so much for joining us today. So, to provide a little bit more context, following on Stephen's commentary, historically, economic growth, as we all know, has been tightly linked to resource consumption and emissions on a rising level. While that model delivered enormous prosperity for some parts of the world, it also created these vulnerabilities. So, degradation of our natural systems, a lot of pressure on our supply chains, resource depletion, and climate instability. So today we're trying to answer the question, how can economies continue to grow while dramatically reducing or changing the material intensity and emissions associated with that growth? This discussion is no longer confined to environmental policy. It's now central to industrial strategy, technological leadership, energy security, competitiveness, and investment allocation. We hear concepts such as beyond GDP, circular economy, but businesses and investors ultimately need the clarity on which models are economically viable, which policies actually accelerate innovation and sustainable practices, and how do we scale transition pathways fast enough to matter. On our panel today, we bring together leaders from business, finance, policy, and innovation to explore what a resource-efficient economy could look like and what it will take to get there. Now, I would like to invite each of our panelists to take 1 minute to both introduce themselves and also to tell the audience one assumption about economic growth that you think needs to be challenged or reconsidered in the next 20 years. And we'll start. Tatiana.
Yes, good morning to everyone. Very pleased to be back to Hamburg to this important conference. So, Tatiana Molcean, I'm the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, and one of the most practical, I would say, in the UN system, and I truly believe that, because working on standards, on practical aspects that impact our life on a daily basis, from the automotive industry to agricultural standards or aging guidelines, because we have an aging population in this part of the world. And based on the work that we are doing in our entity, in our Economic Commission, I would say, replying to your question, that I would strongly believe that we need to challenge the return of the assumption that sustainability is not compatible with growth. And I will talk more about this in our discussions, but that's my strong belief.
Thank you. John.
Thanks very much. It's great to be with you. I lead the International Chamber of Commerce. We're based in Paris. We are in 170 countries. 70% is actually in the global south. We enable $17.5 trillion worth of economic activity every year. And we do not see ourselves as an observer. We are an active participant in global economic activity. I also sit on the board of one of the largest infrastructure investors in the world. It's actually Australian. By the way, Australia has the fastest pool of capital growing at the moment. It's called pension capital. It's about $4.5 trillion. We're a $380 billion fund, and we invest in infrastructure. The reason I say that is that I'm also on the responsible investment committee of that board, and we look at issues like sustainability. As Tatiana says, sustainability and profitability do not actually have to be incompatible, but they can't be assumed. And I think people need to understand in this debate that yes, there's a lot of private capital available to invest in sustainability, but unless there's commercial returns, it's philanthropy, and we have other things to do. So I think this is really important, that you need to ensure that the settings deliver commercial returns. What that said is the incentives need to be aligned, and you won't get that with a lot of the happy talk we hear already in the opening plenary. You actually need to be a lot more focused on the economic narrative, not the political narrative.
Yes, thank you, John. Mavis.
Thank you, Jessica, and it's lovely to be back in Hamburg at the Sustainability Conference. My name is Mavis Owusu-Gyamfi, and I am the CEO and President of the African Centre for Economic Transformation. The thing that I would like, the assumption I'd like us like to challenge is the assumption that GDP growth represents a nation's wealth or a people's well-being. It is fundamentally flawed. And despite all the work that has been done to look for alternative metrics for growth, we still keep going back to GDP growth. GDP growth means that we extract and we call it growth. It means there is inequality and we call it success. It means that people's well-being are not being taken account of, yet the country is seen as successful. We need to look at indicators that really think about things like, is your growth truly sustainable? Are you growing in a way that will leave a livable planet for our children someday? Are you ensuring on the well-being of your people? Is there equity? And once we have a global indicator that measures all of that, then I will feel a lot happier.
Thank you. And John?
So my name is Stephan Schnabel. I run a 125-year-old family company in the field of chemicals and agriculture. And I would like to build up on what has been said already. Yeah, so GDP growth at the end is chemical growth. So with every GDP growth, you see more chemicals, and chemicals are emissions. So there is, at the moment, no other way. But assuming we find a feasible business case, assuming there is finance, assuming there is even, let's say, the support from legislation to have quick approvals, then I think we still have to admit that it takes 4 to 6 years in best case to build one single plant. But we need, maybe depending on the chemical, 10, 20 plants. So the assumption that everything can be changed very quickly, I think this is something which we have to also acknowledge, because we need quick solutions which fix certain problems, but at the same time, we have to admit that these changes will take time. Just the physical time of constructing a plant will take its time. So this is for sure one contradiction which we have to deal with. And the second one, building up on agriculture, is we know growth population is there, arable land is limited, and at the same time we have to get more out of the fields, which normally enhance more chemicals, more fertilizers. So how can we deal with that? And here again, I think if the support of legislation is for fast-track registrations, we can do certain things in that direction, but we need the support. We have to work at the end as one team, all participants together, instead of just putting the whole burden on one side.
Yes, that's an excellent context for our conversation, talking about sustainability not being incompatible with growth, measures beyond GDP, and the alignment that it'll take across stakeholder groups to actually make progress. So let's try to take this conversation in a couple different phases. Firstly, let's talk a little bit more about what this new decoupled growth can look like. So in a world where you see economic growth not necessarily putting so many demands on the environment, Tatiana, why don't we start with you? Across the UNECE region, countries are facing a common challenge, improving prosperity while strengthening resilience and reducing those environmental pressures. So my question is, do you see policymakers increasingly looking beyond GDP, as Mavis was mentioning? And if so, what are those measures?
Thank you. First of all, let me clarify what UNECE region is. So UNECE has 56 members, and it's called Economic Commission for Europe, but we have North America, so US and Canada is also, they're Europeans apparently. Also Central Asia is part of UNECE region, and Caucasus country, Eastern Europe, Central Europe. So when you ask about what is and how countries are addressing this common challenge in the UNECE region. Frankly, I don't think this is totally different from what happens around the world. Across our region, but not only across the world, policymakers are really increasingly looking at beyond GDP, yes? But very important message, because we've been talking, and it's not the first time that this is being mentioned, it's going on for a couple of years. This is not to replace GDP. So it's about complementing it, because GDP remains a fundamental indicator of economic development. I think you also referred to that. But is it enough? Yes, it's grounded in this very robust, internationally agreed statistical frameworks that really has been refined over decades. But is it enough? We have to take in consideration that it's also a very trusted and used indicator. But GDP alone cannot tell us whether people's lives are improving, where growth is inclusive, you mentioned about inclusivity, or whether it is sustainable. So we are moving towards a more complete measurement, I would say. So it's a complementarity to the GDP with additional indicator. First is a much greater attention to well-being, how people actually experience this growth, yes? Job quality, education, health. Second, it's about equity or equality and inclusion. Who benefits? And this was just at the opening, I think that was a very strong message that we got. Who really benefits from this growth? Third, the environmental and in general, the sustainability is now core part of these pictures. Countries are tracking emissions, biodiversity, natural capital, and we, including at UNECE, are measuring different forms of capital, economic, environment, and human and social. But also one important aspect is the long-term and sustainability in the long-term phase. This is essential. We overlook it many times. So in short, yes, policymakers are looking beyond GDP, but it remains essential. What is emerging is a broader framework where GDP measures economic capacity and complementarity indicator that capture well-being, equality, sustainability, and inclusivity.
Very good. And on the back of that, Mavis, I'll come back to you. We've seen that ACET often talks about moving beyond growth to economic transformation. So I'm curious, when you say that, what is the difference between economic growth and an economy that is actually transforming? And specifically, back to some of your earlier comments, what does it mean to have the investment in human capital as a part of that?
So I'd begin by saying that the main difference between a country that's growing and a country that has transformed is its resilience. As we see in sub-Saharan Africa, it's the continent has repeatedly been derailed by major shocks. So what we are now calling multi-crises. And it's because our growth is driven by commodity growth. It is driven by commodity exports. We don't add value. We've become price takers on the international commodity markets. And as a result, we are highly vulnerable. So what tends to happen is there's a crisis in Europe. It hits Africa badly. Transformation, in contrast, is systemic. And what transformation does is that it ensures the countries are adding value to their product. They are diversifying their economies. They are enhancing their productivity. So when the US goes to war with Iran, the poor market woman in Kinshasa doesn't suddenly find herself losing her livelihood and having her business collapse overnight. Commodities, a commodity boom is great. It fills our coffers. But you can't reserve enough to withstand global shocks unless you use that money to truly transform your economy. So in ASSET, we call economic transformation growth with depth. And it stands for 5 interconnected dimensions. D is for diversification. E is for export competitiveness. P is for increases in productivity. T is for technology upgrading, and the final one is H for human well-being. Now, each dimension reinforces each other. And on a continent that is predominantly young, and in 2040 is going to represent 1 in every 4 persons that walk on this earth, it is really important that we invest in human capital. So to transform our economies, human capital and investment in human capital is at the heart of it. We need investments in human capital to ensure that we use technology effectively, we innovate and take it to scale, etc. everybody says we have a problem with jobs. We don't have a problem with jobs in Africa. What we have is a problem with decent jobs, quality jobs, jobs that really transform the lives of our people. So if you invest in workforce readiness, if you invest in skills, then all the elements of growth with depth can be realized on a continent. And look, at the end of the day, our philosophy is really simple. Africa transforms, the world benefits. Africa doesn't transform, the world is in trouble.
Thank you, Mavis. So, John, I'm going to come to you now and ask a question from a broad business lens. Through the ICC, I imagine you're hearing directly from business leaders around the world. When they talk about sustainable growth, what does the success actually look like, and where do they see opportunities? So how does this become a business reality?
Well, I mean, it's very interesting to be on this panel, because one of the challenges here is to recognize, as I said in my opening comments, that sustainability and commercial opportunity don't have to be in opposition, but actually generally they are. Because one of the problems is that a lot of the urging and exhortation to business to participate in the sustainability narrative is based on false premises, because there's actually no longitudinal or empirical study that reveals that companies that invest in sustainability are of themselves more competitive. We would like to think so, and I think part of the narrative is that must be true, but actually there's no economic study that shows that. What it does show that in certain circumstances, sustainability is very important, clearly from a risk perspective, but also, frankly, for access to capital. That becomes very important as well. And often for consumer demand, to meet the needs of consumers is actually important. I mean, a good example is a friend of mine ran IKEA, and IKEA customers want IKEA to be much more sustainable. But when asked the question, are they prepared to pay for it, the answer is no. So what does that mean? IKEA actually had to transform itself, as you would say, in order to deliver a sustainable product at a price point which was acceptable by consumers. But the idea that you can kind of wish your way to a sustainable outcome is frankly a business nonsense. That being said, there's a lot of things that could be done to make it more attractive. One of them is the access to capital to support it. At the moment, that's not just a problem for companies. There's a systemic issue here, where the actual way in which the Basel framework operates mitigates against deployment of capital because it makes it too expensive, because it doesn't recognize a number of issues that need to be recognized in order to lower that. That's why I said, as an investor, I would like to invest more in Africa, but frankly, Africa is uninvestable for a lot of investors because the cost of capital is too high. And that's got nothing to do with you. That's got a lot to do with the way the macro-prudential frameworks under the Financial Stability Board operate, and they refuse to modernize those in a way that can reflect what we need now. So I would say, I see the minister has joined us, I would say one of the key issues, particularly for a G7 country like Germany and a G20 country like Germany, is to join with my organization, the ICC, and reform and modernize those macroprudential frameworks so that we can invest in Africa in the transformation, so that we can actually provide more capital to businesses in a cost-efficient basis to invest in sustainability and deliver a commercial result.
Yes, indeed. From the perspective of the financial community, regulation and risk are still the primary drivers of adapting sustainability metrics. So I think that really tracks from that experience. I'll move now, Stephan. So I'm going to ask you to help us frame a bit of the current challenge. So as a leader of a global chemicals company, where do you see the greatest tension between growth and sustainability from your perspective? And when you flip that on its head, how does that become an opportunity?
I'm not sure if the greatest tension, but at least one big tension is for sure the knowledge transfer. Assuming there are new technologies which are available, for example, to improve farming, which would benefit the farmers, which would benefit the growth of the country. The key is how do you transfer this knowledge to the farmers? Yeah, and social media is there not, let's say, the way to get this information to the people. So if you are able to find a solution for how to transfer the knowledge for new products, then they could farm better, increase yields, increase income, and the growth would be working without, let's say, deploying our resources. is one example.
Very good. Well, I think we could speak for quite a while longer on this topic, but I will ask now for each of our panelists to give a final maybe call to action for this group to get us to where we would want to be from the perspective of a growing economy in a resource-constrained world in the next 20 years. And we'll go reverse order. Stephan, please.
Then if I stay with my topic, for example, there are data available in all ministries in the world, the environment ministries. If you provide this information to certain companies which can use this information to improve recommendations on the field, and to have this, let's say, in a workable mode, not too bureaucratic, make this information available to even small-size companies, I think that would be a big help already.
Yes, technology adoption and capacity building, absolutely. And Mavis.
So if I can borrow from Aliko Dangote, who said earlier this year, Africa is the place to be. And if you want to make money, come along. If you don't, stay home. So on the basis of that, African financial institutions are working together to enhance investment on the continent, to ensure that the $4.3 trillion that is not invested on the continent is leveraged and invested on the continent. So I would say the call to action is work with those financial institutions to learn how to invest in Africa and make money. If not, we'll go ahead without you.
Very good. John.
Well, one of the good things I would say is that you're seeing increasing evidence of investment in in the energy transition, and you see increasing amounts of private capital involved in that. But if you look at it, that is predominantly going to advanced economies. It is not going to where is needed in developing emerging economies. And that's because of the inhibitors of the way in which the financial system operates. What my call to action is to align the incentives to make Africa, make developing emerging economies investable. And that requires a restructure of the way in which the Financial Stability Board operates and a reweighting of risk to bring it and make it contemporary. That has not happened, and that is something that I think we could all join forces on, because we all want to see opportunity, and we also want to see opportunity in Africa, but until it's investable, it'll be very hard for that money to find its way there, and that will hurt African businesses, and no one wants that.
Yes, most certainly. So changing from just a risk-focused approach to what we can do in opportunities by evolving the financial system. And Tatiana.
I would like, okay.
We're minus 12.
I think you're good. There you go.
Now it works. Thank you. Now I would like to go back where I started, that economic growth or economic competitiveness is sustainability. They can work together. I know I will contradict you. You mentioned that there are not enough studies or not enough evidence to give the necessary tools for an investor to do that. I think there are, but we do have a problem. We are still talking about in two general terms. We are generalistic about this. We need to do it. What we do and what is the most efficient is to really go to the roots, to the grains. So we have to embed it. We have to change the standards. We have to change the rules, that there is no other way than to do this. This is how we do it. And I will shortly, two examples from the work that we are doing for standards and norms. We have to do this in the automotive industry. 3 years ago, we changed the rules on how the life expectancy of the EV battery, electric vehicle battery. You cannot have a battery if it will lose more than, 80% or 20% of its capacity in 3 years. That was a rule, that was a standard that was changed. And it's a sustainability aspect. For the agriculture, changing the standards for trading in agricultural goods, on packaging, on selling, on the standards. This is how you make the change. Not by legally binding enforced instruments, but unifying the norm and make it easier to benefit from a single approach to sustainability. This is the way ahead for us.
Thank you so much. I invite you to find our panelists throughout the day to continue the conversation. We will now hand it over to Frank Scheidig, the Global Head of Senior Executive Banking at DZ Bank. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Very nice to meet you. but actually, I know a lot of people might be useful.
Like your comment on that. To introduce one of our most important parts of the German government, Minister Carsten Schneider. He's Minister of the Environment, Natural Preserve, and of course as well, nuclear safety. Carsten, I forgot. Climate protection, that's it. He's a man, not just like me, that's why we are friends. We're fighting for Eintracht Frankfurt. That to say in Hamburg, I know it's tough, but it's at least what makes us united. And another thing, which is way more important, he puts his action where his mouth is. Let's welcome Carsten Schneider on stage. Carsten.
Yeah, dear Frank, Heine, ladies and gentlemen, thanks a lot for the opportunity to give you some insights about the German politics and the question you discussed. We discussed today one of the most important questions of our time. It is economic growth possible within planetary limits. Can our economies continue to prosper while using far fewer resources? The short answer is yes. Your input today has underscored that transformation is possible, but to be successful, we need to change how we do business. I've taken two key messages from our discussions today. Let me touch one briefly. First, resource consumption is what makes or breaks our competitiveness. We heard this message today from UNECE, the ICC, the DZ Bank, and Bloomberg. Our traditional growth models are reaching their limits because resources are finite. And because the geopolitical landscape is changing and not in our favor. It is forcing us to rethink old assumptions. Many resources are becoming scarce. Prices are subject to extreme fluctuations. Markets are under pressure. Most recently due to the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Supply chains are becoming more unreliable or are at times completely disrupted. The result is that resource use has become a strategic financial issue for companies. Second, circular economy. Frank, I'm responsible for this area too. Circular economy provides the answer to how we can break free from our problematic dependence on critical raw materials. Today's discussions make this very clear, and it was even in the opening session. If we succeed in scaling up circular economy, we can solve environmental challenges while also generating the growth that our economies urgently need. After all, a strong circular economy conserves resources. Every material that is reused multiple times is a material that does not have to be imported at high costs and with considerable effort. At the same time, circular economy fosters innovation within companies, which in turn boosts the economy. Circular economy is no longer just a cost factor, it's a strategy for greater resilience. It is one answer to how companies can continue to prosper even as primary raw materials become more expensive or scarcer. And the data confirms this. Green tech and circular economy have continued to grow steadily in Germany, even in years without economic growth that we had too much last years. They have been growing against the trend and becoming a major economic factor. The Boston Consulting Group forecasts that the market volume of the green tech sector will grow to $7 trillion by 2030. Circular economy will make a significant contribution to this growth. I plan to support this development through policy. That is why we are promoting circular economy here in Germany. We recently adopted the action program for the strategy in the cabinet. Through this program, we will translate the goals of our circular economy strategy into action at national, European and international level. According to current plans, around 260 million euros have been allocated for this purpose up to 2029. Never before has so much money been available for circular economy. This program comprises 12 measures. One measure is the establishment of a platform for innovation and for new projects. And we will launch a new funding program to promote circular economy. The program offers support for new production processes and digital applications. This will enable us to advance circular economy while also promoting environmental protection and climate action. There are also developments at the European level. The Planned Industrial Accelerator Act is intended to create lead markets for climate technologies, such as electric cars, batteries and heat pumps. This, too, will benefit both the environment and the economy. At the international level, the agenda of the Turkish COP31 presidency is relevant. The incoming President Murat Kurum plans to drive forward circular economy and electrification on a massive scale. He aims to form a global coalition, and we support him, to increase the share of electricity in global final energy consumption from just over 20% today to 35% at this COP. This will be this message. Turkey's initiative underscores the direction that Germany and the European Union have already taken. More renewable energy, more electrification and more energy efficiency. Another priority on the COP31 agenda is to cut waste growth in half by 2035. We currently produce 2.1 billion tons of municipal waste per year worldwide. By 2050, so in 25 years, this figure will rise to 3.8 billion tons if we take no action. It is important to change course, especially with regard to circular economy. However, I would like us to go one step further. Circular economy does not begin at the end of a product's life cycle, but at the very beginning, with design and the choice of materials, and whether the product is designed from the outset to be repaired, reused and recycled. Ladies and gentlemen, environmental policy is guided by the precautionary principle. This means that the focus should be on preventing environmental damage and health risk through proactive measures. We have not always succeeded in the past. Dirty rivers, contaminated soil, polluted groundwater, these all were the price that we paid when industry operated for years with little regard for the environment and the public good. Our economy is now undergoing another period of transformation. We must not repeat these mistakes. If we take data centers, for example, they will be expanded in massive scale over the next few years, here in Europe, but also worldwide. Data centers not only need electricity, they need resources for the building and IT hardware, water for cooling, and physical space. The goal is to take all environmental factors into account at a very early stage when selecting a site. This includes determining where there are grid connections, renewable energy resources, and enough water for cooling. If we consider these factors, if we do this right from the start, we will achieve greater acceptance and we will prevent harm to the environment. Ladies and gentlemen, these issues are not new, nor is the idea of circular economy. What is new, however, is that these issues are no longer discussed only at sustainability conferences. They are also a focus of events such as the Munich Security Conference or in Davos. More than 100 billion tons of material. That is how much the global economy uses every year. 100 billion tons. For construction, heating, clothing, and toys. 100 billion tons of materials that have to be extracted from the ground at high cost and are then often disposed of afterwards with no less effort. It is easy to see that this cannot work on the long run. Redoing growth, the title of today's session, is an invitation to rethink this principle. What is considered valuable? What counts as a loss? What does productivity mean when raw materials are finite? The good news is that we do not have to start from square one. The technologies are already available, and many business models are currently being established. Policymakers have the responsibility to create the right framework, and I'm pleased that you are all working to make things better for our shared future. Point.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it, and I can assure you, you will see it over the next couple of months and at least another 3 years almost, probably even beyond. That's what we're all aiming for, that Carsten and the rest of the government will definitely walk its path. But action is also very important, and I like the comment on the panelists. For sure, banking also have to become way more wise acting and look on risk differently as before. Then they should see the chances. That was where banks were founded for then, yeah, hundreds of years ago. Having said that, as a banker, I want to thank you, Carsten, and I think we will walk together a lot of things and paths. You mentioned the COP31. In Berlin, we will have a pre-COP together, 30th of September this year, to support, of course, Turkey, the host country. And not just that, we will fight as well in Davos and many other occasions, IMF this year in Thailand. So if you have questions how we can work together, please make use of that. Ask us when we have the break now. And I hope we can go forward together for better tomorrow. Thank you very much. We have a final photo now, and would be nice if the panelists could come up for that. Thank you very much, and thanks to the Hamburg wonderful Handelskammer here. It's a beautiful building. Hi.